Hi there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and blog. Today we're doing something a little bit different with the Simon Says Stamp Limited Edition Mother's Day 2018 card kit. This kit is no longer available, but its contents still are. So let's take a look at what's inside this kit. It's a big kit, and you know, typically with these kits, you are gonna get so much bang for your buck, and so I recommend if you like even just a little bit in the kit, it is so worth spending the money. So first off, we have some metallic bright gold Nuvo drops there. I'm so happy that I got the gold. It's such a neutral color. It's fantastic to use on all kinds of projects. Those are the 2 ribbon spools from the Carousel collection from Crate Paper. There's a nice mint green one and a really pretty pom-pom pink there. I really like the spool it comes on too. I'm sure I will reuse that after all is said and done. Those are the Simon Says Stamp Peaches and Cream sequins. And there's also 4 mini envelopes. There's a mini white envelope, a 4-bar craft, an arch birchwood 4-bar, and a metallic. Those were the Chasing Dreams Puffy Heart stickers. That right there, and those were from Crate Paper, by the way. Those are the Die Cuts with a View paper lace matte stack. It comes with 30 of them. It makes quite a mess, but those are really pretty. You can use those for all kinds of things. I think I spent a good 20 minutes just trying to get all the bits and pieces out of it so I wouldn't find them all over my craft space later on. There's hearts and butterflies. It's really pretty. Next, we'll go on to one of the stamp sets. That is the Simon Says Stamp Flower Explosion 6x6, and then that's the Mother's Clematis 6x8. And that paper is from my Mind's Eye Bliss. It's more of a wedding paper, but it's so pretty. Those are the Crate Paper Flourish Thickers. It's 2-sided, so there's lots of fun thickers with that. And then the cardstock that comes in the kit would be that Glimmery Green. Then we have Ivory, and we have Nina Desert Storm. I'm making 8 cards with this kit, and you're watching part 1 of a 2-part series, and in part 1 I will make cards 1 through 4. So for card number 1, I used a panel that is 4 inches by 5 1/4 of Bristol Smooth watercolor paper, and I'm going to stamp one of the flowers 3 times on my paper with some Versafine Onyx black ink. It's a waterproof pigment ink, and because it's a pigment ink, it will stay wet for a little bit, so I'm going to cover it with some embossing powder and heat that with my heat tool. I'm going to be using Tumbled watercolor markers to color my images today, and because this video is more about the ideas than the techniques, I'm going to be skipping most of the coloring, but I will list the markers that I used. And I'll show you a little bit here, but for the most part you're not going to see most of it. So all I do is I scribble a little bit of that marker down, and then I'm going to use a water brush, my silver water brush with some water on it, and I'm just going to spread that color all around, and it works really well on the Bristol Smooth watercolor paper. And I'll do that for all 3 of those flowers. Very simple, not a lot to it. Once I'm done coloring, I put my panel in my stamp platform so that I can stamp Mom onto my panel. And I'll do that a couple times to make sure it's good and crisp. And I put another little sentiment above it that says I love you. All with that same ink that I was using so that it's nice and crisp. And I'll adhere that to a piece of the pattern paper, and then I'll adhere that to my Nina Desert Storm card base with some liquid glue. For the inside, I stamped my sentiment using jet black ink from Fawn and then stamped the flower in a coral ink. And to embellish it, I'm going to use those gold metallic Nuvo drops. And I'm just going to put those sporadically in different spots. And if you notice, I have a little bit of splatter, but that's really easy to fix with a piercing tool. I'll use my piercing tool and I will kind of scrape off the excess after I flatten them out a little bit. So you'll see there's a couple spots And you can't see on camera there, but I'll pull it up. And all I do is scrape off the excess. And that, after I'm done there, that's going to finish off card number 1. For card number 2, I cut down a piece of the pattern paper to 4 by 5 1/4 inches for my Nina Desert Storm card base. I have one of the die cut panels from the Paper Lace Matte Stack from Die Cuts with a View, and I'm just taking some of the little circles out of my panel. I'll trim it down, and then I'm going to adhere that with a tape runner. And some of the tape will be sticky through those holes, so I rub my embossing buddy bag over it to eliminate that stickiness. And then I'm going to use that Script Mom wafer die. And so I'm running some of my white cardstock through my little Xyron to make a sticker out of that. And then I'm going to run that through my Sizzix Sidekick. That mom die right there is pretty intricate, and so that's why the little sticker paper will work out pretty nicely. But I'll show another way of doing it too if you don't have that. And now for the shadow die, I really wanted that to be gold, but I don't have gold paper, so I'll cover the die in Versamark ink, and then I'm going to coat that with some Simon Says Stamp Fine Gold embossing powder. And I'll pick it up with my reverse tweezers, and then I'm going to heat that with my heat tool. And I'm going to leave that in there because there's just something so satisfying about watching embossing powder melt. I know, call me weird, but I like it. And it gets all shiny. So I'm going to let that cool, and then once it's cool, I'm going to do it all over again just to kind of give it a little bit more smoothness and make it a little bit thicker. And then I'm going to remove the sticker back from my script die, and I'm going to adhere that to the mom shadow. And that's a pretty intricate die, like I said, so you're definitely going to want to be really careful when you take off that paper, because otherwise you could rip it. And the nice thing about that sticky paper is it's not completely adhered until you really push it down. So you do have some wiggle room when you are adhering it. It gave me a little bit of a fit, but I was able to get it down. And I do like using the sticker paper. So I'm going to put a gold leaf thicker on my panel, and then I'm going to adhere the mom die with some foam tape. And then I'm going to put the gold puffy heart down below. They seem really thick, but I think they'll mail just fine. And then I'm going to adhere the whole panel with some liquid glue since there is already plenty of dimension. I'll stamp one of the small sentiments onto a scrap of white cardstock with some black ink, and then I'm just going to trim that out and adhere that to the top there with some more liquid glue. No, not liquid glue, tape runner, ha! And then I'm going to stamp another sentiment on the inside with that same black ink. And that's going to end up finishing card number 2. Card number 3 is probably my favorite card. I'm going to use the big 6x6 flower explosion stamp. So I've taken a piece of Kansan XL watercolor paper and I'm temporarily adhering that to my stamp platform. I'm going to do some embossed resist, and so I'll rub my panel with that embossing bag, and then I'm going to ink up my stamp with Versamark ink. And then I'm going to cover that with some clear embossing powder and melt that with my heat tool. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, this kit is no longer available, but it is a heck of a deal. They're very exclusive or limited edition, and so if you see them and you see anything about them that you really like, they retail for like $50, I think, but the Flower Explosion stamp that I just used is $15.99 retail, and the 6x8 stamp that I've been using with the clematis and everything else, that one is $24.99. So just by itself, the stamps are like $40. So I would just suggest if you see them, if you like any part of the kit, you get them. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm going to use my Distress inks to get a very cool effect. That right there is Tattered Rose that I am using, and I'm going to be a little bit strategic about rubbing my ink on. As you can tell, I'm just rubbing it directly onto my panel. And I started with the Tattered Rose, and that next purple color is Victorian Velvet. I'm putting those over like the rose parts of the stamp, and now I'm using some scattered straw, and I'm putting that kind of over the daisies that are in this stamp. And the blue, that is tumbled glass, I'm putting that over the berries in the stamp. And I know it looks like a hot mess right now, like a total hot mess, but I promise you it's going to start coming together. Now I'm going to grab that velvet again, and I'm going to, pieces that I missed, that Victorian velvet, I'm just putting that over those. And now I'm grabbing my crushed olive, and I'm putting that over the leaves. Trying to be careful not to rub over the top of colors that would be complementary and would cause brown. So now I'm going to spritz it with some water, just like 4 or 5 spritzes. And I'm just letting that water kind of move the ink where it wants to go. And I'm going to heat that up, and I'm going to do it again. So I will take those inks, and I'm going to rub those again over those places, maybe if I miss some spots, and I'm just going to intensify the color. That's really all I'm trying to do. And I want to fill in some spots in the gaps so there isn't too much in the way of white space. And in the end, I really just love how this works. It's so pretty. You could do this with, just about any background stamp. It gives it a really pretty watercolor, not perfect, but just a watercolor effect. And once I'm happy with where the ink is on there, I'm going to spritz it again. I'm going to spritz a little heavier this time to kind of make the water move a little bit more. And then I will heat that with my heat tool. And I love how it turned out. I'll dry it and trim it down. And now I'm going to do the same thing I did earlier with the mom script die. Running a piece of white cardstock through the Xyron to make a sticker, and running the mom script itself through my Sizzix Sidekick. And I'll make that into a sticker and adhere that down to the shadow. And that shadow was cut out of some of the leftover pattern paper that I had. I'm going to use some foam tape on my big panel to adhere that to my card base. And then I'm going to use some liquid glue to adhere the mom down to my card base as well. And then all I'm going to do is use the metallic gold Nuvo drops, and I am going to put those all over the insides of my flowers. And when I'm done doing that, that's going to actually finish off card number 3. For card number 4, I'm going to use some Bristol Smooth cardstock, and I'm going to put that in my stamp platform and stamp that with my Versafine Onyx Black ink. I'm using the big clematis and the 2 leaves along with a bud. And when I'm happy with the impression that I get, because I have to stamp it a couple of times, that's a big surface area. And I'm also going to emboss it, so I use my embossing bag over that. And I'll use the Versafine Onyx Black ink, like I said, and once I'm happy with the impression, I'm going to coat that with my clear embossing powder, and then I'll heat that with my heat tool. It's a really big stamp. I'm going to color these again with my Tombow markers. And I'm going to bypass most of the coloring, as you'll see, but I will list all the colors. It's the same sort of thing I did earlier today, or in this video. It's pretty simple. And to make my background, I trimmed a couple of strips of pattern paper and a larger middle strip of pattern paper. And I am going to use a tape runner to place those small strips on the side of my larger strip. I'll take that to my card front, or tape it to my card front, and I'll trim off the excess. I just find it's easier to do it this way rather than to try and trim it down. I typically trim too much and then it just looks silly on there. So if you're careful when you trim, you can do that pretty easily. And while I've got my scissors out, I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut my images. And once I know where I want those things, I'll put my panel in my Mini Misti and I'll stamp the word Mama on my card front. I'm using that same Versafine Onyx Black ink because it's nice and crisp. It gives a good clean image. I'll adhere the leaves with the multi-medium matte liquid glue. And I'm going to cover that with a stamp block while I get my foam tape put all over the back of my larger flower. And then I'm going to stamp another sentiment over the top of Mama. And I'm also going to stamp the larger sentiment from this set on the inside. I'm taking a risk here, just doing it by hand and not using the MISTI, but it ends up working out okay. And then I'm going to take that last bud that I had colored and cut out, and I'm going to glue that to the inside of my card as well. And for a last bit of embellishment, I'm going to grab those metallic gold Nuvo drops. And I'm going to put a few of those on the outside just to give a little extra, a little something something. And that'll finish off card number 4. If you liked this video and don't want to miss part 2, hit the like and subscribe button down below. And now we're going to take a look at the final 4 cards. Or not final, the first 4 cards. Final 4 will be in the next part. So there's card number 1, there's card number 2, there's card number 3, and there's card number 4. I always appreciate you stopping by. Thanks so much, and I hope you have a great day.